Hi everyone, my name is Gail. I don't have a normal place of residence. I don't think any of you have ever been to a place like this, or maybe you have, but not as often as I have. First, try to guess. I have to say, in this house, difficult to get into, but even harder to get out. This building, and there's a lot of protection. No, it's not a palace and not a castle. It's a little easier. I live in prison. Yes, imagine that. And no, I'm not a prisoner. I actually live there. Now I'll tell you what and how. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like my story, comment on the video at the end, write your opinion, and share it with your friends. So, I can't exactly go into details about where exactly my house is located, but I can tell you I was there and why I live there. My mother's name is Alin, and she got a job in prison a long time ago. Her position was the most common one in the administration, but it tripled her because she lived not far away and needed a job very badly. My mother's parents died early, so she had to take care of herself. At her new job, she met a guy who was a colleague. In general, they started dating after a while. My mother fell head over heels in love and thought that they would be together forever. That guy quickly convinced her to re-register the house for him. He did it by stealth, by which time my mother had just gotten pregnant with me. After the deal, he dumped her pregnant, leaving her with nothing. He quickly resold the house, took the money, quit, and left somewhere. My mother, a lonely young pregnant girl, did not know where to go, where to turn, because she was left all alone. My mother was at a loss, and besides, she was very afraid for the child. She didn't want to hurt me, so she did everything not to be nervous. She decided that she would stay in the workplace for the time being. Of course, it was illegal and wrong, but there was nowhere to go. In addition, there were doctors nearby and colleagues at work treated her well. They did not pass her. We tried to help as best we could. 9 months passed very quickly. My mother planned to find an apartment, but did not have time. All the money went to a medical examination. My mother also bought things for me in advance. All these months she lived in one small room. There was a bed, there was light and heat. In principle, nothing else is needed. No one used this room. Only my mother had the keys, which was fine with her. When I was born, my mother was released from the hospital, and colleagues helped her sneak into their house, where we lived with her. It's good that I grew up a quiet kid. Maybe they called me a poet. Gail means calm. I almost didn't cry or scream. Plus, my mother was able to work for some time and continued to receive a salary. The two of us had enough to live on, but the thought of her own apartment did not leave her alone. She was now thinking about how to get the goat who had cheated her out of her apartment. My mother was determined to return the money that was stolen from her. My mother's colleagues loved me at work, and I grew up thinking that this is really my home, that everything is as it should be. Our room was not far from the office where my mother worked. We had a simple order of things. In the morning we woke up very early, raced, put to sleep, and brushed my teeth. Yet no one swam, then ran to the canteen, where she cooked us breakfast. Usually it was porridge, or scrambled eggs with bacon, warm milk, cheese, bread, and a croissant. We liked to eat big, so maybe that's why Mom had plump cheeks like mine. After that, we ran back to our room, where my mother gave me toys, a laptop, a fruit, and went to work. I just had a phone, and my mother taught me how to use it. In case something happened, I had to push one button and my mother came running very quickly. I couldn't go to school because it was too far away, and driving me around the prison grounds was also too risky, so my mother taught me herself. In short, life in prison is very fun, because it's like a game between villains and police officers. Evil people break the law, create a mess, and the police put them in jail for it. I used to hear criminals crying, asking them to be released to their families, some threatening to kill everyone, some saying that they should not touch him at all, because he is an important person. All sorts of people are yelling while they are being dragged to the cell. Because of the atmosphere, many employees are harsh and almost don't smile, but they don't see me yet. I was treated well by everyone. They always brought me food, toys, we were given clothes, warm blankets, pillows, someone even paid us for the internet. People were good. They knew my mother's story and were sorry, but my mom wasn't ready to give up. She kept looking for ways to solve the problem and finally found it. I was 10 years old at the time. Imagine, for 10 years I didn't really see the world, because we didn't go out. My mother finally saved up a decent amount of money and hired a lawyer, who took up the case and tried to sue the fraudster. The fact that the male fraudster was working in prison at the time only made his situation worse. We sued him and the court put him on the wanted list. They didn't look for him for long, though, and he didn't even think about hiding, because he was sure that my mother would never sue him again. The proceedings were loud. We were written about in the newspapers. The man saw me and realized that I was his son. He tried to make up for it, but I told him to fuck off. In the end, my mother and I won. The court decided to confiscate his property in our favor, and the fact that he turned out to be my father played a role. They took away his house, car, land, and forced him to pay us moral compensation. We were madly happy, and he was just mad. He decided to pull us along and told the court where we lived. This was unacceptable, because it is supposedly unfavorable conditions for the child. My mother could have been stripped of her parental rights, but our lawyer put in his word just in time. He said that all these circumstances were entirely the fault of the defendant and was right. In general, he did not succeed. He was jailed and justice prevailed. We couldn't believe we had our own home now. It was even bigger than Mom's. We sold it, bought another house, renovated it, and my mother learned to drive and got me a job at school. She takes me there in the morning before work. And today we have a special day, because my mother and I will be hosting guests in our house for the first time. We invited all of her colleagues to celebrate our housewarming party. You know, there is a miracle and justice too, as I have seen for myself.
Hi, my name is Nick. I was born and raised in prison, and then I was supposed to be sent home to relatives. But I chose boarding school, and now I will tell you why. As my mother said, when she married father, in the family immediately began the problems. Or rather, there were detractors who constantly quarreled with their parents. My dad had a brother, Uncle Chris. He often came to visit us, sometimes to borrow money, then to eat, then to sleep. He didn't work and didn't have a family. My mother thinks that he was jealous of his brother and therefore drank even more. My father loved him and therefore never refused to help. One day my father was offered a good job in another city. It was necessary to go there for the whole week and return home only on weekends. Since the earnings were good, Dad agreed and we didn't see each other 5 days a week. As soon as Uncle Chris found out that Dad was not there, he began to visit us even more often, under the pretext of looking after us. At that moment, my mother was already pregnant with me, although there was no help from him. His mother could not expel him either, out of respect for Dad. Sometimes Uncle Chris could just stay at our house without asking. This irritated my mother terribly. She and Dad even had a fight about it once. He didn't want to listen to Mother in any way. "He is my only brother, and I will take care of him," my father shouted. Well, then Father began to have difficulties at work. He began to come less often, and Uncle Chris stayed more often. So, under the influence of alcohol, he began to molest Mother and harass her. My mother was in a position where she was afraid he might hurt me. Uncle beat her on the back and head, and my mother did everything so that he did not touch her stomach. At some point, she ran into the kitchen and grabbed a knife. Before he could raise his fist again, she stabbed him. He fell. My mother called an ambulance. When the police arrived, my uncle shouted that she had attacked him and wanted to kill him. My father refused to come after hearing that my mother tried to kill his brother, and my mother was put in prison. That's where I was born. My mother named me after her father. I don't know how it all looked from the outside, but my mom says that my appearance on the bill was supposed to be the best moment of her life, and it was ruined. The fact is that when my mother had contractions for several hours in a row, there was a security next to her all the time. The doctor was late somewhere, and there was no other. During this time, something went wrong with my mother, and she began to lose a lot of blood. People in uniform saw it and did nothing. And when the doctor came and examined her, my mother was handcuffed to the bed so that she wouldn't hurt them or the doctor. Usually when a mother gives birth, her baby is put on her breast. I was deprived of such a moment completely. They took you almost immediately and didn't tell me where you were going. I wasn't even allowed to feed you. I screamed, got angry, and cried, but no one listened to me. I was lying on the bed and just sobbing. I demanded that you be returned, she said. Postpartum recovery takes more than a month. During this time, women should rest, eat well, and not be nervous. My mother was kicked out of work 3 days later. She could not see me again until the next day. I don't know what you were fed or if you were fed at all, but when I did take you in my arms, I finally felt calm. It did not last long. You were ill. You had a fever. I was really scared. For hours I begged for water and a doctor, but my screams were cut off by a rude remark or a blow on the bars with a club. I tried to feed you as much as possible with my milk, but it was not enough, because I did not eat well. You cried a lot and it broke my heart. Women who were in exactly the same situation, with children and behind bars, understood each other perfectly. They were the only ones who helped those who had no relatives. When their relatives brought some things for their kids, or for them, and needed something to eat, they always shared it with me. I was grateful for their gestures, my mother said. Also, according to her, those prisoners wouldn't have done anything like this if it wasn't for the motive for her attempt on my uncle. The prison has its own rules and regulations. I am not talking about the fact that people there observe a special regime. They have their own rules in addition to the basic ones. Each cell has its own rules. For example, in my mother's case, women who heard her story that she almost killed her husband's brother because he attempted to kill her child aroused respect. For this reason, my mother was not touched. But among the other, there were those women who were convicted of horrible crimes, infanticide, for example. They were not liked there. They were not allowed to eat at the common table. They slept on the floor and were treated like dogs. And everything that relatives brought was taken away from them. When I got a little older, it became a little easier. To be honest, since I was born there, on the prison, it seemed to me that this is my home. In fact, it was. My mother and I were always there. In my opinion, there was nothing unusual, because I did not know any other environment. The barbed wire on the high fence didn't bother me. I thought it was necessary. Besides me, there were other children there. We played together while my mother worked. More often, they sewed something. We all wore the same clothes, only sometimes we were visited by other people in more beautiful clothes. They spoke very sternly to us and quickly left. According to the rules, I was only allowed to stay with my mother until I was 3 years old. At the end of the term, my relatives either take me away or send me to a boarding school. My mother said that the day of the separation was the hardest for us. We were both crying. I still remember how bad I felt, how I was afraid to leave my mother. They wanted to give me to my Uncle Chris, as he is a relative. My mother was against it, and I was screaming and hysterical as ever. I didn't want to go to him. Then they decided to transfer me to a boarding school. My mother says that she doesn't know which of the evils was on her at that moment, but she was afraid that Uncle Chris would kill me. That's when I was sent to boarding school. To tell the truth, I didn't see much difference between that house and this one. Here, the order seemed even more disciplined and demanding, because there were more children, and we were already more adults. Yes, here a child of 6 years old on communication poles for 10 years, and all because it is impossible to do otherwise. Otherwise, they will trample. You know, we don't choose our parents. We can't agree or refuse to be born. Sometimes it happens that we have no choice but to accept, whether we want to or not. I don't blame my mom for the fact that has been our fate. Sometimes we are responsible for our parents' mistakes. And yes, I have no idea what life looks like on the other side of the boarding school fence. How does it feel to have a family? Your own house? A lot of food and cartoons, not for 20 minutes a day. All I feel right now is longing for my mother, and I can't wait to visit her again.